At that meeting, they said, listen, it's come to our attention that there's a $10 million loan that we're not aware of. And we received copies of the loan with signatures on it that were not ours. And next thing I know, I'm in orange jumpsuit, handcuffs. Some guys dragging me down this hallway, the main prison, and we go down this corridor where there are literally dungeons on either side.
You're the oldest guy walking into a federal prison camp where you're going. What is going through your mind?
What really that crisis ended up providing the great opportunity for me.
It's such an entrepreneur dilemma is I've got to get bigger to cover what I've lost so that I can become whole and then I can double or triple everything. All right. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back to Nightmare Success. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Hey, don't forget to hit that follow, subscribe. Hey, if you like it, share it. Share it. It's good stuff. It helps the show. Well, I've got a great guest here today. Happens to be a fellow member of mine at the White Collar Support Group. And I was thinking, when I was talking to John before we got on, this episode is really for people I think will get a lot out of this, that either you are an entrepreneur or you want to be an entrepreneur. It's got so many life lessons in what it takes and how you do it and the pitfalls that can come and the things that you got to, when you're sitting in that chair and the decisions you have to make. Do I take this much risk? Do I pull it back a little bit? How do I grow? John DiMenna, he did all that. And when I say he did all that, he was a known guy on the East Coast. He put together a group, Seaboard Properties, and it was headquartered in Connecticut. But he was in a 40-year real estate career, commercial hotels, apartment complexes. And I was just telling him he did something that I don't even know if I've even talked to anybody that was able to escape the crash 2008, but he did. He went for a long run on this thing and talked his guys into, his partners, that they needed to get out. The timing was good. And in 2007, they did get out of all their commercial holdings. And as it was said, he was seen unofficially as kind of the smartest guy in the real estate business. He figured it out. And, John says, the sad thing is that he started to believe that. And in 2017, he was sentenced to 85 months in federal prison, 2 counts of wire fraud, and he was 77 years old. And I think, for most of us, I think John probably thought that was a death sentence. The pandemic came along and he was released in 2020, home confinement, and he's home now. But it's just an incredible story. He is an unbelievable writer. I have, he's been nice enough to share with me some of his writings. He's got a book that's coming out, a memoir. It's called The White Collar Elegy, and it's all about his journey and life. And he's been published in a lot of his writings have been published in several publications. And I think if he had it all to do over again, I think that's what he wanted to do. He became this great real estate guru, but I think he actually just wanted to be a writer. And now that's what he's doing, oddly enough. So it's come full circle. I can't wait to jump into all this. Before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. I know a lot of you guys don't like the process of going and looking for a car. You know what I'm talking about. You spend a couple of weekends walking car lots looking for a car, and then you spend like 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all the pain and hassle of getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. You can be watching like a football game or something. They're doing all the work for you. They'll negotiate your best price, and they also offer you warranties and financing, full service. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. It's the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. John DiMenna, welcome in. How are you?
Thanks, Brent. Good to see you.
So I feel like I've been inside your head reading all of your different things, and you have such an interesting beginning too. You know, you 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 talk about, well, just I'll let you tell it. Lead us back into the young John DiMenna growing up, your family, siblings, getting into the business.
Well, my family was, I grew up in a very stable environment. My father was a general contractor, and it was a family business. My grandfather had started it, was very successful, and then his two sons, one of them being my father, um, took it over and managed it for decades. And we were a very close family because my grandfather he bought a farm in Connecticut for the entire both families, both sons' families, to spend the summers in Brookfield, Connecticut, and we lived there every year till I was 15. So we were a very close family. I really almost felt like I had two fathers, two
It's like a whole
mothers.
compound.
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
had my uncle had three children, and my we were three. I had an older brother and an older sister. I was the youngest. And we did everything together. Those families. I mean, we every Friday night we'd be out to dinner with my cousins during the winter, and in the summers, we were there together. And the underpinning, we were all grounded by the family business, and it was very much in our lives because we were public contractors, public works contractors, which means
Hmm.
you're always bidding on work. So there's kind of an element
Tough
of
business, competitive business.
very competitive business, and there's
Yeah.
really an element constantly of insecurity. Because if you don't get a job, you might go a year without a job, and
Hmm.
so is there going to be income? I can hear my mother asking my father, "Well, can I go shopping now? Did we get the job?" It
Right.
was that kind of. But actually, we were very comfortable. We lived in a nice home in Westchester County, which was a wonderful community. It was kind of one of these very successful suburbs out of New York City that evolved post World War, and they were wonderful communities. They were filled with Irish, Italian, and other immigrants who children of immigrants who had been successful, and
Hmm.
they belonged to. We all went to Catholic schools, and we belonged to a country club in Westchester County. So it was a very stable environment. I never really thought that I was never one that was earmarked to be in the business. My
Hmm.
brother and my cousin were.
You
My
start your
brother,
book off that way.
yes, right, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember my grandfather telling me when I was in college, because I had never wanted to be in the business, but I was thinking about it. As it got close to graduation, I said, I don't know, maybe I should think about the family business. I wanted to be a writer, but I wasn't sure how that would work out. And he discouraged me. I remember I asked him, I said, do you think Grandpa I could come into the business? And he said, he was not that articulate. He didn't speak English that well. And he said, well, you got your brother Nick. He's on the inside. Meaning, he would be the administrative guy. And he said, and you got
Yeah.
your cousin. He's the outside, and you. And that was it. Nothing followed. So,
That's your grandpa that says
yeah,
this.
that's my grandfather. So, looking back, he was right. So,
Well,
but
you
anyway,
also talk. I mean, your grandpa. You talk about that time period where I thought it was just interesting from the standpoint that this memory of yours in the garage in Florida, and
yeah.
he's in a suit and cufflinks and whatever, and you guys are just sharing. You say he shared and repeated a lot of different stories, but I feel like that you must have had kind of a kinship with him.
Well, I ended up living with him because before I went to school in Florida, I lived with him for a while. So I really did get to know him. We had kind of I would say, complicated relationship. He was a
Yeah.
very difficult person, and very powerful, imposing, and he bigger, larger than life, and very aloof. He was not a warm, fuzzy person.
Hmm.
It was difficult to live with him. And there was really a period of time where I couldn't stand being around him. But it's funny. Over time, I grew really more and more to respect him. As I said in that opening chapter, I was at that stage where I was in that obnoxious indifference, where you don't really
Right.
appreciate what these people before you accomplished. When I look back, what he accomplished, he came here from Italy, 16 years old, no money, didn't even speak the language, and how
Yeah.
he ended up, being a successful businessman, creating this
Incredible.
incredible infrastructure for several families was amazing. But
Well, I think the other thing you shared with me just before we got on, because I've been reading bits and pieces of your material, it's very evident that you're uh, a very good writer. And we were talking about that that would have been something. I think when you said, was it when you got out of college, John, that you left and went for a year over to Europe and thought you were going to write?
yes, right, yeah, and I didn't, which was puzzling. I had started a novel my final year in college, and then I thought I would finish it. In fact, it was about my grandfather. It was called. I still have the title. It's called "Death of the Commendatore."
Mm,
Commendatore is it's an Italian designation that the Italian government gives to its most prestigious citizens for great charity work or some others
hmm.
significant contribution. He never was a commendatore, but he had that stature, and so that. But anyway, so I went to Italy and I didn't write, and then came back and ended up starting to work for the company just temporarily, I thought,
Yeah.
and but I actually loved it, and I stayed there for
Well, you were
18
with
years.
some colorful characters that you describe in your memoir of your
Yeah,
dad. He just says, "Yeah, you want to go? You see you in the yard
right. Yeah,
the next day." And you said, "Well, I'm thinking about Monday." And he said, "No, if you want to come to work for us, you're going to come to work for us
yeah,
tomorrow."
right.
Which, and the guys that you were around, uh, you know, they were, hard. You could just tell. I mean, they were guys that
Well, yeah,
were sweating it out and getting it and loading trucks, and you were thrown right in the middle of that. And you said, "I didn't really know how to do any of it. I had two hands that I could help with, but." And you
I had
said your
no
dad
skill.
was kind of tough.
I had no skills, and I started in the bit on the absolute bottom. I was just a gopher, really, and but I loved the guys. I mean, because it was a very interesting mix of people. We had a lot of Italian immigrants who, a lot of them came from Tyrolia, which is northern part of Italy,
Hmm.
very hardworking. And then we had a lot of second generation Americans who were World War II vets. There were a lot of World War II vets. And they were great guys. They were in your face. They wouldn't let anything pass.
Well,
But
it sounded like
I really
they pretty
bonded
much
with them.
treated you like you were one of the guys too.
Yeah, they treated me well. I think because I didn't come in as quote a vice president with a tie and jacket, and I never tried to use my the fact that I was the boss's son. I just did
Yeah.
whatever they told me to do, and my father was always screaming at me, so that kind of helped me bond with him. I always
Well,
thought he
you
was
told you.
cruel to do that, but I think he did it as a favor to me.
Yeah,
But
probably.
yeah, he said that didn't he, to me later in life. I don't know because he had quite a temper.
Well, you tell a funny story about that when he would check up on you a lot, and you guys were doing a big job under one of the bridges there in New York, and you had shown up, and he's usually calls you at 10 o'clock, or you called him at 10 o'clock from the phone booth
Right.
to tell him where you were on the job, and you always sweated these phone calls out. and you didn't call him until noon. And he said, I've been sitting there, I'm going crazy. What's going on? And,
Oh,
and
yeah,
you told him that you were way ahead. You guys were getting it and way ahead, and you were going to be able to
but
be ahead of schedule by the end of the day.
I dreaded those calls. I mean, no matter what you told them, it was never good enough. If you said 50 pipe a day, it should have been 100. So I
Yeah.
always dreaded the call. And if I didn't have anything good to report, it was really rough. Unfortunately, I think I kind of developed these pathological coping strategies, how to deal with people that I'm interacting with in business because of that. I ended up really kind of managing it by not being truthful, and then I would fix it and everything would be fine. So I kind of figured out this is a strategy, which I think I ultimately ended up becoming a pattern. And in my later life, when I developed the real estate company, I had kind of a contentious relationship with my partners, and I implemented the same strategies, which worked for quite a long time until there were real problems that
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't solve, and ended up being terrible for everybody.
Well, and you were there, John, in that family company, I think for 18 years, which you thought was going to be a part-time job. It
Yeah.
ended up to be 18 years. And in that time, you got married, you had 4 kids. Um, and then the company that all the family was with dissolved, and you had to figure out something else to do. How did you deal with that?
Well, I had been doing some real estate deals for the last few years. I was at the construction company. So a friend of mine said to me, we were still battling to try and save the company. And this friend of mine who was in real estate, he said, John, why don't you go into commercial real estate? Even if you become a broker, you're good at sales. He said, you, your brother, and your cousin, you have 12 children, of the three of you, and you're going to have to get them through college. There's no way you're going to be able to come back and be able to create a company that can support you all. So I
Mm-hmm.
went to my father, and he agreed. He said, I really think you should leave. You have something, the other Nick and Frank don't have an option. You do. You'd really be doing them a favor. So that's what I did. I kind of looking back, I always regret it now. I sometimes feel like I should have gone down with the ship. I don't know whether it would have made any difference. Who knows? But
Probably not.
those are the kind of things that haunt you. But anyway, so I decided went into the biz, started my own investment real estate development investment business in 1987. Couldn't have been worse timing. They say it was
All
like
right.
starting a brokerage investment business in 1929. There's an 87, everything blew up. I mean, it was the worst real estate recession. I can say 40 years in the business, that recession, late 80s, early 90s, was worse than anything,
Yeah.
including
It everybody.
2008, because it was a debacle everywhere. I mean, I remember a real estate pro telling me in 1989 that real estate as an asset category is over. It'll never come back because so much money was lost. I mean, that's how bad it was. So now I was floundering. I mean, here I am with 4 kids. This thing didn't work out. I had $200,000 from an IRA. Looking back, that was a lot at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through it, with this real estate company. And so that was really one of the worst periods, other than what eventually happened to me in that late '80s, early '90s, trying to just survive that real estate crisis. But what really that crisis ended up providing the great opportunity for me. So what everybody was doing in the early '90s was becoming managers of real estate because everything was going back to financial institutions, and they were
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed with properties and they needed managers. So I started to try and do some property management, but I had no platform. So I knew some guys who were in trouble, Seaboard Development, and they had a little management company. I went to them and asked them if I could buy it. And they said, yeah, they sold it to me very cheaply, 25,000, and they
Mm-hmm.
take half down. I borrowed it from my father, and that's how I started. But I couldn't get any management because I was still too small. And then I realized, hey, wait a minute, the right. opportunity here is buying properties. Everything was on the market and cheap. I mean,
Everything's cheap right now. Right.
buildings that were 200 a foot were going for 40, and nobody was buying them. So I started to go out and try and raise some money. I had a little management income, so I was starting to like barely keep my
How old
head
would you
above
have been, John, at that time period?
How old was I?
Yeah,
I'm
about
sorry.
that when you were getting that started in like 90, 91.
Yeah. So I how old was I? I missed your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah. How about what time period? How old would you have been?
Oh yeah, right. So it was 1992. So I was 50. In fact, I always tell my kids, my
Okay.
best part of my career was when I was 50. So I between 50 and 65, that was great. After that,
Yeah.
before and after was
It's a
tough.
good run.
But so I started to go out to try and raise money, and it was very difficult. And in fact, I had one group. Someone introduced me to he was an Indian financial planner, and his clients were all professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants from the Indian community. And he said that. So I met him, and he said, "Well, I'd like you. Why don't you pitch your real estate deals? I have these seminars twice a month, and you can come and pitch your deals." So I had a little property I was buying from a bank, an office building, and we raised the money. And about a week before the closing, I started getting calls from all the investors he brought in that said they wanted their money back. And
Oh no.
we hadn't even closed yet. So I don't know what happened. So I said sure to all these investors. But then I called up the fellow who introduced me, and I said, I'm getting all these calls. He said, well, tomorrow this fellow is going to be arrested, and
Mm.
because apparently he was running a Ponzi scheme, and so these people all knew about it. So now I had the deal, but I thought I had. So then I went to these. I called this fellow Bill Merritt, who my wife and our wives were friends, and I had done a deal with him before I left the construction company. And so I called him, and he had just left a big company that he had been working for. It was a post AT&T startup that
Hmm.
had become very successful. It was um, it was sort of an early tech company, had been very
Hmm.
successful, but then it kind of blew up. And so he and one of the other principals were out on their own. They had left the company with a
Some
fairly
money.
substantial amount of capital. And so I convinced them that this was a good thing to do. I said, look, we should start buying these Class B office properties because they were all over the place in Fairfield County, Connecticut. I think we can fix them up. We'll get lots of tenants away from the A buildings, and
Hmm.
anyway, so that was a strategy, and they bought into it. And early struggles, of course, but we became very very successful, and we really went against the grain. We were contrarians, and after the first 5 years, everybody was starting to take note of us and
Hmm.
saying, God, you guys really made the right decisions. And then little by little, the real estate market started to come back. And by 2005, 2006, it started to hurtle forward commercial real estate. I mean, everybody was back in. Private equity was raising money. Financial institutions were falling all over themselves to
Well,
provide.
what were you thinking, John? Because at the beginning it wasn't easy at all. I mean, I remember you talked about that you guys walked into the one building that you had identified, had a beautiful lobby, needed to be fixed up. Your strategy was, we're gonna get new tenants in here. We'll be a little bit below market what the other buildings are doing, and we'll get these guys in here. And one of your partners was really tough on the fact that he was hounding you, but it did work out. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, when you finally hit that crest of, how did you feel about that? Because that had to feel like a sense of accomplishment that you'd gone through the real struggles of the real estate world, but you had really identified a niche market to go into. And at the time that um, 2006, 2007, you guys were the players in the market.
Yeah, I really figured out that I started to believe I really knew what I was doing, and that I had
Yeah.
figured out a niche, and that I had actually had a good template for to be successful in business. I remember reading Jack Welch, who I got to know a little bit, and he used to say he always wanted to be number one or two in whatever
Mm-hmm.
businesses you went into. And so I decided, that we had to be number one or two, and we became number one in Class B office buildings in Connecticut. We really were number
Which
one.
is
We
a
had the
big
most.
deal.
And so then when we sold the properties, I employed that. Still believed in that strategy, and I decided that I was going to now have to try and embark on acquiring the most best diversified real estate portfolio in an urban area in Connecticut, and we'd have the best properties. And actually, we
Mm-hmm.
did accomplish that. The problem was we overpaid, and the properties didn't perform well enough to support the investments. And that was
Mm-hmm.
really, the beginning of our demise.
So when all that happened, because you were, I think, 65 years old when you cashed out on this first go, and
Yeah.
it was a great situation. Everybody got more than you guys put your portfolio out on the market, and you got more than what you had valued it at.
Right.
And like you said at the time, this is the first time really that you had real money. And but it wasn't that you were going to take that and go home and watch the waves flow in on the beach. You
Well,
thought, I'm going to take this to the next level.
Well, I did struggle with a decision. The decision was, do I um, just go small, end the partnership with my partners because they were difficult,
Mm-hmm.
and just go small, get rid of all the overhead, and just little by little do a couple of deals and kind of coast, not get out. And I had a fellow who worked for me. He was like my he was my general manager. He oversaw the leasing and the construction. Um, and, he was convincing me. He said, why don't we just go small? You and I, and a couple of people. And my
Mm-hmm.
accountant told me the same thing. He said, John, just go to make your life simpler. And I was very close to doing it. And then the building came on the market. And I called another my closest friend, who was a fellow who encouraged me to go into real estate. And I said, I'm thinking about buying this building. I don't know whether I should or not. And he said, well, John, why don't you do it? You've got this great reputation. You've got all these investors. They'll follow you. Why don't you do it?
Sure.
So I spoke to one of my partners, and Bill Merritt, who I had the closer relationship with. And he said, okay, let's do it. But he said, let's not syndicate it because I'm not sure of this property. So we should
Mm-hmm.
just do it ourselves, the three of us, which meant I'd have to put up $2 million, half of what I have.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that should have ended it for me. Why would,
Yeah.
looking back now, why would we use all our money? That doesn't make any
Right.
sense. We made a fortune for these guys.
Right.
We can't have them take a risk with us, Anyway, so we did. And really, that property did not work out.
On the first go.
Yeah, first go. It was an office property. And it was what we liked, a lot of tenants. Well, we had two big tenants, and both went out the first year. So that was really a problem. And I tried to disguise it, and I kind of did for a while. We bought something else, but we kind of got behind on our first deal. And even though I did a couple
So
of other deals,
that's an interesting point though, John, because that happens. You get, and especially in business, you get something that didn't quite work out. You get another piece, but that first one always is the one that kind of weights you down. And can you catch up enough
right,
to make it whole? It's such an entrepreneur dilemma. Is I've got to get bigger to cover what I've lost so that
Right.
I
Yeah.
can become whole,
Yeah.
and then I can double or triple everything.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's, it's not an uncommon thing.
No. Yeah. Well, you know, and what happened is I was good at keeping it going, almost too good. So I ended up buying a whole portfolio after that. And at the end of the day, now we were strangled by this portfolio. It looked beautiful on paper.
Mm-hmm.
It was just what I wanted it to be. It was the best diversified urban portfolio in Connecticut, maybe even
Mm-hmm.
New Jersey.
Yeah.
And you could put every building on a brochure. It looked great.
Mm-hmm.
They were leased up, but they weren't cash flowing. And so I kept trying to finance out. And the financing, hoping that we would be able to develop enough income to support the financing, and it
To
never
create the
did.
cash flow.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
and I
Well,
was able to hide it from everybody until I didn't.
well, let's talk about that, because how, when did you know, John, that you weren't going to be able to make and cover everything that you were trying to
Well,
make happen?
really till the very end, I was concerned. I kept coming up with a new strategy. I started to get some. One of the strategies was a fellow I met who said that he was going to raise a whole bunch of equity from Australia. And I went with him for like a year and a half, where he led me down, and he turned out to be a real crook. He ended up
Mm-hmm.
in jail. He's still there. Um, and so I wasted a lot of time with him. Then I was able, though, I started working with mezz lenders, but then I became dealing with marginal mezz lenders, guys who had
Mm-hmm.
outrageous terms. So I'd get the
Yeah.
money, but a week later I was already behind.
Almost like a hard money loan.
Yeah, it was hard money. And
Yeah.
then at the very end, though, I was working with I formed another private group to raise money to take out our whole group. It was going to be what they
Mm-hmm.
call a recapitalization. I don't know whether you heard of a recapitalization, but I went to a Wall Street firm, and they were very positive about it. And in fact, we had an investor from Bahrain that was going to invest $200 million, would have taken everybody out. So I don't know
Mm-hmm.
whether I'm boring you with all these stories, but so the guy from Bahrain,
Oh no, that's interesting.
he offered us $195 million, but I really needed to get to 200, something over 200. So I said to these guys, look, bring them up. Let's have dinner. I can give them a tour of the properties. That usually wins them over. So he came up. We had a great tour. We had a steak dinner. He loved everything. He was very enthused back. He went back home. He went back to New York. The next day, he had someone call us, and he lowered the bid to 180 million.
Oh man.
Yeah. So, and I know
Oh
I can never
man.
get my partners to go along at 180 million. So then we did find another group that was going to put in 50 million, and I thought we could work with that. And he was, we had a proposal. I signed it, and I thought we had a deal. And he called me that Monday after the weekend and said, unfortunately, the credit committee turned him down, because this was now 2015, no 2014,
Mm-hmm.
but still the fallout from 2008 was a good 10 years before it really
Sure.
ended. Yeah.
Yeah. Scared everybody.
Then there was one more thing that I tried, and it was I was introduced to somebody who had done a funding with the Israeli bond market. It was a terrific program on paper. The Israelis were just looking to invest in New York in American real estate, and it was an unbelievable program. Very low interest rates, very long term payouts. Almost were barely paying it back,
Mm-hmm.
and it was during that period when my partners found out about everything, and so I never really could uh, execute that
So
program. I
you
don't
were
know.
close on two or three things.
Yeah, I don't know whether we would have executed that anyway. But and then just one more thing, I had put
Yeah.
together another private investment group, And I had said to them, look, my investor pool, they want to get out. I'd like to put together a new private company. We're going to provide some capital to this company until we raise enough money to buy them out. And then this new company will go on to buy and build that company up with more properties.
Mm-hmm.
And but again, that didn't happen.
So you were close. You know, that's the crazy thing about these nightmares that manifest themselves. There's times and things and places where you think you've almost got it, or you think if I could just have that next meeting, I think I could solve it.
Right. Yeah.
And you look back on it and you think, gosh, if that could have or would have, then
Yeah.
So John, how did it happen? Did you get a knock on the door from the federal?
Well, it's in my memoir. I will send you that chapter. It's called The Revelation.
Yeah.
I thought that I still had Band-Aids on everything and no one was
Mm-hmm.
aware. And my partners asked for a meeting. We had regular meetings, but I was a little concerned about it. It was something that was a bit of a red flag. And at that meeting, they said, listen, it's come to our attention that there's a $10 million loan that we're not aware of. And we received copies of the loan with signatures on it that were not ours. And that's at that meeting is then when I told them everything, that we were really in bad shape. The company was behind. I had put on this debt. Explained to them I was trying to save the company. I know I shouldn't have done it. And so they asked me to resign, which I did. Looking back, maybe I should have tried to negotiate something, but I felt so guilty. I felt, that maybe there'd be some value in it if I just admitted everything, resigned. But once I signed it, resigned, I was done. I was wiped out, everything. And then from there, I hired a lawyer, and I decided that I would go to the U.S. Attorney's office and tell them everything, because I knew I was going to be in legal trouble, and try and cooperate with everybody. I cooperated with my partners. I cooperated with the government. Unfortunately, none of that helped me. And it didn't help the investors either, because what happened is my partners, they completely panicked. These were two very sophisticated businessmen. We had 100 investors, easily worth $500 million. And they wouldn't want to lose money. And we had a lot of properties. It was cash flow.
Right.
We had too much debt, but I always felt,
Right.
put some more money up, restructure the loans. So, but what they did is a week after our meeting, they filed bankruptcy. And then
man.
And then they resigned. And they brought in a specialist, and the bankruptcy court ordered a liquidation. So everything was just done. Yeah.
Wow. And it probably could have been saved through a couple of different transactions that could have happened.
Look, it doesn't mitigate what I did, but
no. But I'm just saying, if everybody would have stayed into being sane and rational to figure out the solution to it, even with your situation of stepping out, they probably could have saved themselves. When you went to the U.S. attorney, John, did they know about what was going on, or were you telling them something that they didn't know about?
They didn't know about it. No, they didn't know anything.
Wow.
My attorney said to me, he said, look, it's going to come out. I think you're better off if you go in. He said, I have a relationship with this U.S. attorney. I think he'll be sympathetic to your situation. And why don't we do that? So I agreed to it. And I went in. And at the very first meeting with the U.S. attorney, he was very nice to me. Said, I've seen a lot of men in your seat. Guys like you will get behind. And then there are the other guys who just lie every day. I know you're not one of them. But, at the end of the day, he did give me a very good deal. He was very, it didn't matter all that,
Was you, like, I know your wife has been through this whole thing. You've been married 52 years. Was she along knowing about this as it was going, or was it something you came home and said, "Hey, listen, I resigned. I went to the U.S. attorney. I talked to them about what would happen."
That's in the memoir too. That scene is it's brutal. I had to, tell her, if everything, she did say to me after, she said, you've been creeping crazy hours. And she saw me waking up every day in bath of perspiration,
Yeah.
when you get to,
Yeah.
but, she didn't have any idea that, it was such an undoing. I mean, it was one day all of a sudden we were wiped out. I didn't
Yeah.
have, a decent bank account. I didn't have any residual. I should
Yeah.
have. But anyway.
That happens a lot to people who own businesses and are entrepreneurs. Everything goes back into their business and they're reinvesting to try to make it bigger. And then all of a sudden something like that happens, or anything can happen. And all of a sudden you're wiped out, and they're like, "Well, why weren't you saving back?" And you're like, I know I should have. Yeah. So John, how long did the process last from the time that you went in to tell the U.S. attorney that here's what happened to you were making a plea bargain with that Justice Department?
It took about a year and a half. I went in 2016, and I think I signed the plea agreement in September of 2017, I believe. So it took that long because they had to go through the financials, and they were very complicated because I'm
sure it's very complicated. You're talking about millions of dollars,
and there was a lot of loans from intercompany loans that had to be reconciled. Actually, they never did reconcile them. I don't know why they did. They couldn't. But the workout specialist didn't seem to be really the right person. If you ask me, they weren't able to. And what really troubled me is that they didn't do well in the bankruptcy court. To me, they made a lot of mistakes. First of all, they declared bankruptcy in Delaware, which to me was a real mistake because Delaware is debtor friendly. It's not borrower friendly. If they'd done it in Connecticut, they aren't that sophisticated. They're borrower friendly. I really think that the bankruptcy court would have worked with Seaboard and its affiliates. Instead, the Delaware bankruptcy judge said, liquidate everything. That way,
it just went from bad to worse.
That way, the secured lenders will be taken care of.
Yeah.
And then what really was awful is that the U.S. attorney determined that the total losses from the liquidation was $68 million, and they attributed all of it to me. And they wrote up in their documents, it sounded like I committed a $68 million fraud, a scheme to defraud people. And even when I got to prison, I had guys asking me where the money was,
Yeah, well, sure. Yeah.
So,
well, I want to get in. I want to get into John, the whole thing of you're the oldest guy that walks into your federal prison camp. But before we do, I want to recognize a new show sponsor that we've got, Drew Chapin, a guy that is somebody I know, and he was a San Francisco startup guy, tech guy, and for all of us out there, do you think that you are worried about, or the idea of your online reputation? Because a lot of individuals think there's just no hope when it comes to managing your reputation on Google. There's hope. It's called Online Reputation Solutions. And it can help you with whether you're building a reputation from scratch, repairing your search results after a negative news story, or even if you're just trying to position yourself a little bit better against other business competition. Online Reputation Solutions can also help you on how you're portrayed on the new popular AI services like ChatGPT. To learn more, visit onlinereputation.solutions. They're even launching a do-it-yourself SEO option, a course for individuals who want to take on their search results on their own budget and their own time. Listeners of Nightmare Success can take $100 off of the DIY SEO course with a coupon code Nightmare Success. And Drew has helped a lot of people that I know, and he knows what he's doing. So it's online reputation solutions. And speaking of people in the white collar support group, Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the white collar support group. It's the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the white collar support group, and I tell you, this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is great space for you. Join us on Zoom Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern. For information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So you go through this whole nightmare, John, and you finally get to the point where they're telling you that you have an 85-month sentence. And I'm assuming at that time you're either 76 or 77 years old.
Right. Yep.
You're the oldest guy walking into a federal prison camp where you're going. What is going through your mind?
Well, it was horrific, leaving my wife, and I wasn't leaving her in a good way. She had just filed for bankruptcy. We have no money. My kids are wonderful kids, but they're not really financially capable of supporting her. So she had broken her ankle, and she got $100,000 from a landlord. So she had that to live on. They even take my Social Security away, so she didn't have that. So it was horrific entering prison. And when I was sentenced to Devens, FMC Devens. It's a medical facility in Massachusetts, and the protocol there is for all new inmates in the prison camp, they put you in the shoe for anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks. But I didn't know that, so I think I'm going in there. Next thing I know, I'm in orange jumpsuit, handcuffs. Some guys dragging me down this hallway, the main prison, and we go down this corridor where there are literally dungeons on either side. There's all sorts of screaming, moaning, fighting inmates. I mean, I just couldn't believe that. I'm saying, God, how the hell did I get here? Which is what everybody.
Yeah,
thinks.
surreal. You're walking into a movie set.
Yeah, I mean, here I am. So anyway, and I put you in this dungeon, which is really what it is. It's freezing cold, and I was there for 3 days. There's no windows. You can't sleep because the lights are on. The fan never stops, and there's groans and screaming all night long. The food is horrific. It's like dog food. It was filthy. So those first 3 days were really tough. And then I finally was sent to the camp. The camp seemed like the Four Seasons after.
Right, exactly.
But it was still, it isn't like I went there saying, oh, gee, this is great. This is going to be fine.
Yeah.
And, I was there like every new inmate, scared to death. And when you arrive after the shoe, you haven't showered, you're grubby. The good news is, as you know, that a lot of the inmates, they're very welcoming. Everybody's been through it. And so, all of a sudden guys came up to me and they said, listen, can we help you? They gave me some food and do you need any clothes, extra blankets, a pillow? And so I bonded right away with it. And because I was the oldest guy, it actually kind of served me well. And no one could believe my sentence, that I was so long for someone my age.
Yeah.
So, and
85 months at 77 years old.
And the second day I met a really great guy. Steve was just a terrific guy, and he had been in there for 5 years. And he was younger. He was about 60, but a seasoned veteran. And he really was my mentor, helped me get through everything. And he said very early on, look, you got to get a routine. And for some reason we bonded, and he trusted me. He said to me the first week, he said, I really trust you. I can tell you anything. And so that relationship was really what got me through. I mean, he left early on, but as you know, you need that
Yes.
introduction to get through that that first
You
phase
do.
is very tough. It's
It's
great
such a
challenge.
good point too, John, for anybody who's going or getting ready to go in. You will find somebody. I find a lot of people that are helpful,
Yeah.
but having that one person that kind of takes you under their wing and teaches you the inmate rules. They'll give you the pamphlet that says this is what the prison rules are, but
Yeah.
the inmate rules are what you need to live by. And
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
person who does that for you, it's
Yeah.
a lifeline, really,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
new
And he tell
world.
you, don't avoid this guy. This guy's a good guy. So it really means a lot. Because there are a lot of people. I feel like us who got it in trouble, did the wrong thing, and then there are other guys there who are in there doing. As someone said to me, they're doing life on the installment plan. The
Hmm.
guys have been criminals all their lives, and they're hustling you while you're there. So, and it's not that obvious all the time. But so I that to answer your question, the beginning was tough. Between the shoe and then there's just the challenge of really believing where you are and adjusting to it. I think the worst
Yeah,
thing too
getting
is
adjusted.
the COs. They make you feel so badly about yourself. They make you feel. You know why you're here. You're a bad guy. That's why you're here.
Yeah, you're a
Everybody here.
number.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so I didn't have any COs that I can never say I bonded with or became friends. I mean, the best is some were decent, but
Yeah.
but it's
How
their
did you do
job
your
too.
time,
Yeah,
John?
yeah.
Like a lot of people do their times different way. How did you do your time in there?
Well, here was the hard part is I thought, well, right now I'm here, I'm going to be a writer. I always wanted to be a writer. I'm going to write about this experience, and maybe I become good enough to get published, or some value will come from my experience. Well, the first day they closed the library, which wasn't much of a library to begin with.
Right.
So there's now no room to go in and write. And the dorm where we resided in was freezing cold. You just couldn't sit at your bunk and write. You couldn't even read, so you had to keep moving. So
Hmm.
the only way I'd write is I'd write at my bunk for like 10 minutes in the morning. And I just started writing a journal. And, I didn't like the journal. It was just I did this, I did that. And I started to write some poetry, some prose poems.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, that can be like a daily thing that maybe at the end there'll be some kind of narrative arc. And then I learned that I could go, in the computer room to get your emails. I learned that I could send myself emails
Hmm.
and I could write some longer vignettes.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of what I did. Well, and then I got a routine. My job was dishwasher, which doesn't sound great, but actually I got to like it, because
You get pretty good at it.
yeah, number one, it was warm. It's the only warm
Yeah,
place. And
sure.
I don't know, there's something about the tactile there, something about it that I liked. And also you get you could eat early and without the
Yeah,
crowds. Um, and but you'd be done at like noon time because I had the morning shift.
yeah.
And 5:15 you had to be there. And then I would come back from work. I'd shower, and then I'd have the afternoon. I'd walk, and then I would try and do as much writing as I could, but it would have to be 20 minutes in, and you got to wait 20 minutes and
Hmm.
go out. And then at night we had at 7 o'clock we had adult education. It was called. It was really just movies and videos. And then after that, you kind of hang around the bunks and chat with everybody. There'd be these gatherings. And at 10 o'clock, it was lights out. And then
Yeah,
5:15.
lights out, 10 o'clock.
So but
Day's
you got
over.
in that routine. And I ended up too with that where I started walking an hour every day. So it was the kitchen work, an hour walking, and then whatever writing I could do. And I would say that after a while, the day started to just move. Um,
Yeah, you get
and
into these routines, and
yeah, right, yeah.
it's. I'm interested, John, on thinking that you had 85 months and you're going to do 86% of that time. And then all of a sudden, well, I'm not even sure if it's all of a sudden. When did you find out that there was a possibility that people were going to be let out because of what was going on the outside.
Well, what happened is, as COVID evolved, we heard that there were a lot of inmates dying in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And the warden, we had several visits where he made us aware of how serious this was, that there were issues, especially in prison environment because of the closeness. So we all
Mm-hmm.
had to start wearing masks. And then we started hearing stories about that inmates were applying for compassionate release and were being released.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then it became, it was almost ghoulish, where we start counting the deaths and you're almost rooting for the deaths to go up. Hey, with 30,000 a day. And there was, before the compassionate release, there was this directive supposedly that came from Attorney General Barr encouraging the Bureau of Prisons to release elderly inmates early for home
Mm-hmm.
confinement. So that whole period, it was probably about 9 months, where we realized that COVID was becoming a potential escape hatch for
Mm-hmm.
us. And everybody started applying for compassionate release, sending letters out. And then, I was one of the, in fact, I was the first one to be granted compassionate release.
Well, you
Never
fit the
had.
profile of everything that was said that needed. I mean, you were
Yeah,
77, 78 years old, and you were in the exact zone of what COVID was taking down at that moment in
yeah,
time, whether it was the nursing homes, retirement homes, or whatever it was
yeah.
that age group that was really hit the hardest.
But you had to go back to the court where you were sentenced, and that judge had to make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a hearing, and I was able to attend the hearing via Zoom. It was a
Mm-hmm.
very surreal experience.
I bet.
I was in this room in the main prison. It was a huge room, and I was about 50 feet from the screen by myself in this long desk.
Mm.
And there was this Zoom call on believe me, it was like a size of a movie screen. And the
Mm-hmm.
judge was at the center, and then all these people where I had investors who were speaking out against me, and
Mm-hmm.
my lawyer, and the U.S. prosecutor, and they all, I just sat there and listened to but I could see myself up there, and I
Sounds
looked
like a
awful.
movie.
Yeah, I mean, I looked awful. I lost 40 pounds,
Yeah.
and so I was there, and these glasses that they give you. I don't know whether you wear, these big black
Yeah.
glasses.
I had the reading glasses that I
Yeah,
bought from
right.
the
Yeah,
commissary.
right. My son, who saw me, said he didn't recognize me. He didn't know who the heck that guy was. And said I didn't. I know I didn't recognize myself. In fact, it was upsetting because I really looked like I was dying. I couldn't believe how skinny I was. But anyway, so I left that.
Did you know right that day? Did
No,
John, did you know right that day that that was going to happen, or how did that work?
no. The judge said that he listened to the arguments, and he'd make a decision soon. Was what he said. I really didn't think he was going to grant me the decision because the victim spoke out against me. The U.S. attorney, he was not sympathetic at all. I thought he might be after I. One of the reasons I
Mm-hmm.
think he wasn't is he and my attorney were good friends, and I had filed a 2255. Familiar with a 2255, where you file an appeal because you didn't feel you had adequate representation. And so I don't know whether that was the case or not. But anyway, he was passionately opposed to my release. So I wasn't. But anyway, a few days later, I got an email from my daughter. Said you're released. Your brother's picking you up tomorrow. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That
So you
was,
heard it from the outside instead of the inside.
yes, right. Yeah.
You heard from the outside before you heard from the inside the
Yeah.
prison that
Right.
you
Yeah.
were released.
I mean, I forgot. I came
Yeah.
out of the room and I told everybody, and all of a sudden, everybody was gathering around my bunk. it was like I maybe had a magic bullet that something, whatever I had would spread
Yeah.
on them.
Yeah.
And
Rub off on them.
I really I was speechless. I almost couldn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I was,
I can't imagine, John. I mean, the fact that, if you were doing like a year or two, but the fact that you were looking at 85 months and all of a sudden you have this hearing, you've been in for 18 months and they say you're going to be out tomorrow. I just can't
yeah,
even
that was the other
imagine
thing
how.
is, because apparently once the court makes a decision, they're required to get you home within 24 hours. I mean, the secretary, called me to his office, told me he had booked a flight for me home the next day. I mean, I just couldn't believe it.
Wow.
My brother picked me up.
What was it like?
Well, I always say, well, my brother took me to the airport, and I say in one of my chapters, it's a memoir, that I don't care what anyone tells me. That car drove to the airport and never touched the pavement. That was the way that I felt. And it was very surreal because, as we talked about earlier, it was dystopian in the airport. There was nobody there.
Yeah.
And everything's closed. The only people
Yeah.
at the gate. So it was, a remarkable. I would say from the time my daughter's email till the time I got home, I was just floating.
Well, and the other thing too, John, this was a whole new experiment that went on in this time period with this home confinement, because before any of this happened, it was normal that you would go and you go to a halfway house and then you go to home confinement for 4, 5, 6 months. They were putting people on home confinement for years.
Yeah.
And with an ankle monitor, but I know that I've talked to several people how restrictive some of these were and how unrestricted others were. What was your home confinement like?
Well, normally when you receive compassionate release, it's supposed to be time served, and you
Right.
just go on supervised release.
Right.
But the judge added a home incarceration to my conditions during my period of supervised release. And home incarceration is the most restrictive form of house arrest. So I couldn't even go to the mailbox. I could not go out. I couldn't even take a walk for 3 years.
Wow.
After a year, they let me take a walk for an hour a day for a few days a week. So it was very, very restrictive. But, my own feeling was, I'm not in prison. I'm here with
Yeah.
my wife in a nice little condo. It's not fancy, but it's great.
Yeah.
And and then I just decided, well, now I can really devote full time to writing. And,
Yeah.
and that's what I've done, the last 4 years. So,
And we were talking about, John, how ironic that is that at this point in your life,
yeah.
you're doing what you were planning on doing when you went to Italy
Yeah.
before you entered the family business
Right. Yeah.
to be a writer. And it's come totally full circle.
Right.
And I am confident that when you release this book, it's so powerful and you are so authentic. And I don't even know if you write so well, but there's a texture to it that you feel like you're there, when you're describing certain moments and times. And I'm excited for you to take this next step in your journey. How old are you now?
82. Just turned 82.
82. Yeah. So the next 10 years, you're going to be this prolific writer that you'll be on these shows and they say, well, here's how I got to where I'm at being on the New York Times bestsellers list.
Well, listen,
I went through this journey.
It gives me, it makes me feel good that, that you found it, compelling and authentic. And most of the people who have been through what we've been through found it that way. Because, my goal is to not just tell my story, to tell everyone's story through my story.
Yes.
I'm trying to make it a bigger story, about what it means to be human, and which is difficult. We all struggle with trying to do the right things and trying to deal with what we when we don't do the right things, and that the people would read it. And when you write, you really write. I do anyway. You write to be read, so that you
Sure.
write something that's illuminating to the people who read it, so that even though people maybe have never been incarcerated, but it will tell them a little something about human nature,
Well,
about themselves,
yeah, no,
and and
I'm a big believer.
and hopefully it will promote reform in criminal justice. Because the one thing I do
Yes.
see is that the system it's not doing what they think it's doing. Yes, it punishes people. It's very good at that, but it certainly isn't helping anyone become better people or transitioning
No,
or
they have to
even
do that on their
becoming
own.
productive. Yeah, it's very, very almost
Yeah.
so difficult.
I think one of the deep things that you said in one of the pieces that I read was talking about walking and seeing the, uh, the graveyard
Yeah,
cemetery of the prisoners that had died while they were incarcerated. And I thought it was really kind of profound how you talked about, I think you were talking about your wife said she wanted to be cremated, and you said you really thought about that, and that everything that you had been through and the life that you had lived, you wanted somebody to feel the weight of lowering you down into that grave, and
right.
that
Yeah,
you were here. You
correct.
actually were here.
Right,
And that feeling that they're going to have to put you down and your body's there and you were here. You did
right.
live a
I was here.
life
Yeah,
and had all those things that happened to you
right. That I was
and how
here,
you survived it.
no matter what I was or wasn't. But I was
Yeah.
here. I fought the fight, and yeah,
Fought the fight.
yeah, right, yeah.
I'm interested, John, with somebody who has lived, you're 82 years old. What do you think's your biggest takeaway through all that you've experienced?
Um, that um, life is a long journey, and I would say that I still haven't figured out how to um, really uh, put uh, a complete circle around it, where I can say, oh well, here's my story, and this is what it means. It seems to me that the life and human nature is so complex, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't know whether we ever get to the bottom of the complexity. But from my own personal point of view, um, I still am very conflicted about, myself and the kind of person I am. I don't think you ever really come to terms with that in a positive way. Maybe some people do. I think that at the end of it all, at the end of our lives, we're all struggling with this the summary of a resume for our lives. And I think that for most of us, if we're honest and authentic, it's a very checkered uh, resume, and a lot of ups and downs, whatever, and a lot of things we're not proud of. That song, "Regrets." I've had a few. I'm not one of those. I
Yeah.
have a lot of regrets,
Yeah.
and I think if we're all honest, we die with a lot of regrets.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think everybody has, nobody leaves this world perfect, but John, you have lived quite a life, and you've had a lot of accomplishments, and you've had some things that have been mistakes or what you might term as failures, but um, you've done them all. And that's you have lived a life that so many other people probably haven't experienced. And you took risk. You built. You were known as a guy in the industry, and then looking at how it all went down, um, maybe things could have been done differently. But I really do think that your talent, where you sit now, I can't wait for your book to come out, because I think it's going to be one that's going to be something that sticks with people, something that they read and it stays with them. And that's when, you have a good book. And that's what I think you have.
Yeah, well, thank you. Appreciate it.
For speaking of being grateful, and I just want to give a shout out to Homestead Financial, who lets me use and do my podcast here at this podcast studio. For anybody with your home mortgage needs, Homestead Financial, Greg Afdiev is your guy. Hey, I've got a book out there, by the way. We're talking about books. Mine's Nightmare Success. It's on Barnes and Noble, Amazon. I really appreciate everybody always, with the likes and the shares and the comments. If you got time, please leave me a review on Apple. It helps the show. Want to know any more on me? It's BrentCassity.com. Spell it wrong. It's with a TY, not a DY. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong, and I'll do the same. John, thank you so much for taking the time out today to share your story. It's impactful.
All right. Thank you, Brent. Thanks for having me.
Nightmare Success, in and out.